Spirit Guide. Every human culture across time has recognized good and evil spirits. Of course, the only exception would be orthodox materialists of the present era who dismiss such phenomena without research based on an unexamined bias. They will make unreasoned claims that science somehow supports their view when it is science's job to investigate the unexplained, not explain away the uninvestigated. So they are representing scientism, not science. To be fair, however, this aspect of human experience attracts charlatans, superstition, projection, etc. Similarly, healthcare has existed in every culture and also attracts charlatans, superstition, projection, etc. However poorly understood, but we're not going to get rid of healthcare and say it's just not a valid subject. However poorly understood, there is a core of genuine, well documented, sometimes highly evidential, people haven't done their homework, don't realize this, and rigorously studied and analyzed phenomena as those who have taken the time to engage with the highest quality research on the subject discover. It's beyond the scope of an oracle card to even summarize that research, but below you'll find links to some of my writings on the subject, and I'll mention those now so I don't forget. You'll find on my YouTube channel a talk I gave at the Paranormal Research Forum on interdimensional communication. I'll be giving another such talk in Boulder 2024, April 21st. Now, by the time you get this card, that talk will have long come and gone, and hopefully it'll be videotaped, and therefore I'll have another link in the card, or certainly on my YouTube channel, to that talk. And for those who are dealing with malign entities, if you go to the category section of the site, you'll see a category Mind Parasites, and you'll see many writings there. The introductory essay / YouTube is called Mind Parasites, Energy Parasites, and Vampires. And let's see if we can find a little more on that. Okay, and then there are other how a creative spirit can guide us, like the creative muse. You can see the path of the numinous, living and working with the creative muse. So those are all linked in the body of this card. So let's get back to where we were. I always seem to lose my place doing these. Okay. According to Dr. Samuel Sagan, MD, the topic is both old and new. Old because in all traditions and folklores on Earth, one finds references to spirits and non-physical beings which can interfere with human beings. Thus, Ayurveda, the traditional medicine of India, is divided into 8 sections, one of which is entirely devoted to the study of bhutas, or entities, their influence on health and sanity, and the ways one can get rid of them. This places Bhuta Vidya, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, or science of entities, on the same level as surgery or gynecology. If we look at traditional Chinese medicine, we find that in acupuncture, among the 361 points of the 14 main meridians, 17 have the word Kuei, meaning disincarnate spirit, as part of their main or secondary name. There are unseen forces at work. Some hither us and manipulate us toward darker feelings and appetites so that we produce the sort of energy they can harvest. Other spirits watch over us, respecting our free will, embracing us with love if we allow them. You are never alone, not in your body, this planet, or the spirit realm where your soul and psyche live. Our bodies are a colony of 50 trillion cells working together to allow us a corporeal existence on a planet where there are 8 billion of us and myriad other living things. But we are even less alone in the spirit world, where location is irrealized and sympathetic vibration transcends boundaries of space and time. Invisible allies in the spiritual world and in the microbiological realm work to keep you alive, as above, so below. In the unseen realms, there are watchers and helpers who are always available. Sometimes we need to tune into their subtle messages, other times to call out for their help, other times merely to allow their ministrations to occur while we are scarcely aware of their intercessions. There are spirit guides available to help us. External spirit guides include guardian entities, human spiritual allies, great books, and oracles. The most important spirit guide, however, is your self, as Jung defined it. Jung used the term to refer to the totality of the psyche, of which the conscious ego is a small part. Listen for your quiet, calm, compassionate inner voice. And by the way, this whole website, this is why everything on it is available free and there are no ads, is meant to be a spiritual ally. For those willing to read a bit more, the history of human beings reporting interactions with spirit entities is cross-cultural and cross-period. The culture of scientism, of fundamentalist materialists, is the only I know of that rules out such testimony. Any culture that disregards a whole sphere of human testimony is in trouble. Doesn't mean you have to take the testimony literally, but when there's a whole lot of human testimony about something, you are obliged to try and understand what that is and not just dismiss it out of hand. For example, reports of child abuse were once disregarded as improbable. When we did come to finally recognize the importance of such testimony, we went in the other direction. And some people irresponsibly when we finally did recognize child abuse, then we had stuff like the McMartin case, where they accused all these teachers of being satanic child abusers and so forth, until that was thoroughly debunked after many lives were ruined. So we tend to ignore a subject until when, like we did with the health effects of cigarettes, and then when we do recognize it, go all the way in the other direction. I mean, like in Boulder, I don't even know if you're allowed to even think about smoking in public. Um, there were even people in Boulder who didn't like the idea of people smoking in their own homes and this kind of thing, because maybe that would escape their home and cause outdoor air pollution or something. So we tend to go from one extreme to another. Let me see if I can find my place now. When we did come to recognize the importance of child abuse testimonies, I mentioned some people irresponsibly interpreted all sorts of general symptoms as indications of abuse. I know there was like a best-selling book on child abuse that said started with like a section how you can tell if you were abused, remembering abuse, not being able to remember abuse, being hyper, having periods of low energy. I mean, it gave a list that would include everybody on the planet, and then there were a lot of people who were falsely claiming to have been abused and often wrecking their own families when they had just neurotically misinterpreted based on books like this that they couldn't remember child abuse. Therefore, it was so traumatic they had amnesia about it and stuff like this. So it's best to avoid either extreme and to be neither a true believer nor a debunker, which is just a true believer in a negative. In New Age circles, there's a dangerous and naive tendency to almost exclusively emphasize spirits as benign. British paranormal investigator Joe Fisher, who investigated the channeling phenomenon, came to discover that something genuinely paranormal was occurring, but that the apparent entities involved were not who they claimed to be. I've written an extensive study of his work, which I linked there, and it's called The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts. Some excerpts follow. Fisher reminds us of the long multicultural history of human testimony of entity contact. So this is Fisher's writing now. Socrates, the great Athenian philosopher, spoke in the 5th century BCE of a being whose voice from time to time dissuaded him from some undertaking, but never directed him as to what he should do. So this is kind of a better class of entity. It's just trying to hold him back from doing something destructive, but it's not proscriptive in other ways. The Bible, of course, mentions ministering spirits, Hebrews 1:14, without spelling out their perpetually watchful responsibilities. Robert Louis Stevenson credited the whole of his published fiction to, quote, the single-handed product of some unseen collaborator, unquote. Daily experience convinced the poet William Butler Yeats that there are spiritual intelligences which can warn us and advise us. Napoleon Bonaparte believed that he had a guiding spirit which came to him either as a shining sphere or a dwarf, clothed in red. Sounds like the red dwarfs in the David Lynch films, who came to in the Black Lodge, who came to warn him. And Henry Miller commented that he was, quote, in the hands of an unseen powers, unquote, while writing his powerful novel, Tropic of Cancer. But based on what I was able to stand reading in Tropic of Cancer, it was probably a tormented spirit. Someone, he said, is dictating to me constantly and with no regard for my health. So, and his writings, I mean, I've only read a little bit, are quite pathological. I think that who'd be talking to him would be a lost soul. And that's why it would also disregard the health of its channeler or medium. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychoanalyst, regularly encountered a guardian spirit named Philemon, a force that was not myself, who seemed quite real, as if he were a living personality. So that's, I think, the end from the quote from the Fisher book, with some off-the-cuff asides from me. A fairly well-known person whom I can't name here, a man I consider to be an absolute genius with whom I worked in the 80s, heard voices who gave him unique information of great value. Sometimes they provided veridical information that could not have been obtained through ordinary means. Like one time they broke through to say, like, your sister that you're estranged from is dying of cancer. She's in this hospital. Here's the room number and here's the phone number. For most of my life, I have been aware of a somewhat androgynous being living alongside me whom I can visualize, but who almost never intrudes into my mind with voice and instead influences by presence, unless I'm actively trying to dialogue with him. He seems to be there whenever I cast my attention in his direction, and there is always the sense that he flows through time differently than I do. And I left out the word time. There's always a great depth of feeling, humility, and compassion for suffering. If more specific communication is needed, he allows me to use my mind and word-forming ability to translate his presence and thought forms into words and sentences. He never takes over any part of my body, never claims to be a doctor, that's a warning sign with some of these entities, or to have a specific past life identity. And he never raises even the smallest red flag in my ever fault-finding mind or intuition. I have noticed, however, that if I travel, he will tend to be unusually present, at least for certain travels, as if curiously witnessing a new part of the world alongside me, but again, without taking over my senses. I readily acknowledge that this being could be a way that I experience what Jung called the self. It could be an alter. It could be part of my own psyche, for sure. As Fisher points out, an overarching problem with spirits who work through mediums is that they violate the self-reliance of, at the very least, the mediums they work through, taking control of their bodies and wills. They also encourage a spiritual problem I have referred to as mislocation of the Godhead. And you can see my article or YouTube called Casting Precious into the Cracks of Doom, Androgyny, Alchemy, Evolution, and the One Ring for more on that subject. They encourage those who interact with them to become infatuated and dependent, and to look to them for divine guidance. I'm reminded of David Bowie's character Jareth in the movie Labyrinth, who says things like, "I ask for so little. Just fear me, love me, do as I say, and I will be your slave forever." And I will be your slave. Many spiritual teachers report that evolved non-physical entities influence humanity telepathically without speech or heavy-handed intrusion. Higher beings are silent. They simply radiate knowing and love, said the Venerable Namgyal Rinpoche, obviously a Tibetan Rinpoche. Although I am against one-size-fits-all formulations, this suggests a behavioral distinction between benign and parasitic spirits. The spiritual ally that I have long experienced in my life communicates in a non-directive telepathic fashion, leaving me to form into words the emanation that is always loving, non-intrusive, and that never overrides my will or takes over my body. The influence seems directed toward enhancement of my self-realization and service, not toward vicarious thrills. Malign entities often want to vicariously experience physical sensations through a trance medium or someone they possess. I'm not saying he doesn't seem like the most malign of entities, but Seth, that communicated through Jane Roberts, would sometimes have her smoke a cigar so he could enjoy it, which seemed a little bit worrying to me. Note, malign entities are not limited to possession or mediums to exert influence. Subtle, stealthy telepathic influence by disincarnates to promote dark, compulsive thoughts, feelings, and cravings cannot be ruled out as a possibility. There is strong evidence of their ability to intrude on individual psyches, which throws open the possibility that their influence on the living may be widespread. To paraphrase Shakespeare, there are more things in heaven and on earth than are dreamt of in the philosophies of materialists.